So now we come to the Decepticons side of the 1986 catalog. And like the Autobots, there were a lot that appeared in Transformers the movie. But the first one is one that didn't, and that is Predaking. Predaking here is the combined form of the Predacons, of which there were 5. In terms of toys, this is a reissue of the original Predaking, and it is heavy, right? Like, this guy has some weight to him. And here's a remake of the Predacons, as you can see, a little bit bigger and a little bit scarier looking. Interestingly, just in the last couple of days, there's a new version of Predaking that's out on the Hasbro Pulse site and goes for only $440. So if you got that lying around and you want to get yourself a new Predaking, yeah, you can go ahead and do that. Predaking has the function of warrior, and his motto is destroy first, ask questions later. What's interesting about the Predacons is, of course, they have an animal form, right? As opposed to the majority of the Transformers that we've seen so far, which tend to have, for the most part, some vehicle form. Now, when we get into Beast Wars and Beast Machines, it's kind of an overload of too many animal transforming Transformers. But for being, some of the ones that had an animal form in actual G1, the Predacons are really cool. And they were all very aggressive, mostly predatory types of animals. A lion, a tiger, a hawk, a rhino, and a bull. So very aggressive, and that kind of gave Predaking his sort of composite personality of just being this aggressive hunter, type of character. And among the Decepticons, there are some that are more scary and some that are less scary. The Predacons are definitely some of the scariest. Like, if the Predacons are hunting you, like, you're in trouble, right? You're not shrugging that off. That's a scary experience. Now, the other thing that's interesting about the Predacons, right, is in G1, that term applied, just to these 5. But again, in your Beast Wars scenario, you had the heroic, Autobot faction, the Maximals, and then you had the Predacons, right, who were the Decepticon evil faction, and that applied to all of them. So the name Predacon sort of grew to become much larger than just the original group of 5, and has even shown up in other places, even beyond just Beast Wars. So that's a name that has kind of had some staying power. But I think that, among the combiners, the Predacons have one of the best looking combined forms, right? I mean, some of the others, they look like what they are, a bunch of cars or planes mashed together, and that's cool. But the Predacons, it looks very cohesive, right? With the different animal forms and the giant lion's head and the wings. It's just one of, maybe the most awesome and imposing looking combined forms of all of the G1 Transformers. The next of the individual Predacons is the lion Razorclaw. Razorclaw was the leader of the Predacons and formed the main part of the Predaking body, with his lion's head featured prominently there, just as it is in his robot form. This is the reissue of the original G1 Razorclaw, and this is the remake from my main collection. Now, one of the things that was interesting about this set of Predacons in particular, while many G1 transforms came with stickers that you had to apply, that was not typically the case for the remakes, but for the Predacons, they actually came with stickers, and you had to apply them yourself to get everything to look the way that it's supposed to. But Razorclaw here, yeah, he's really neat looking with his lion's head and everything. His function is Predacon Commander, and his motto is all good things succumb to those who wait. So he is described as being very patient and kind of a stalker and then a quick striker in terms of his attacking style, which maybe lends a little bit of stability to the Predacons as a whole, as pretty much everyone else on the team is a little bit unstable. Next of the individual Predacons is the Tiger Rampage. This is the reissue of the original G1 Rampage, and this is the remake of Rampage from my main collection. Like a lot of the Predacons, very red coloration to him, and I think it's very, very neat looking with the tiger head on his chest there. Again, we see a lot of let's say, alignment between his name and his personality. His function is listed as Gunner, and his motto is those who conquer act, those who are conquered think, right? And so his whole personality is just blind aggression, right? Going on a rampage, this guy just runs around, attacks, doesn't do a lot of thinking or planning. And so, that is, again, perfectly aligned with his name and with his motto. The first of the individual Predacons is the Hawk or Eagle Dive Bomb. This is a reissue of the original G1 Dive Bomb, and this is the remake of the Dive Bomb that I use in my main collection. Dive Bomb's function is listed as aerial assault, and his motto is conquer the skies and what's below will fall. His bio, interestingly and somewhat oddly, describes him as being a very happy bot. Strange or unusual maybe for a Decepticon, but I guess he enjoys battle and enjoys what he does, flying over the battlefield and bombing every Autobot beneath him. So that's what Dive Bomb enjoys doing. Obviously, he is a major kind of visual component in the combined Predaking form, with his wings being very visible and prominent in that. And we have seen at least one other instance of the name Dive Bomb being used for when the Robot in Disguise mini-cons shared that name with him. So there's been a little bit of Dive Bomb outside of G1, but definitely one of the cool Predacons, and with his wings and his attitude, that's Dive Bomb. And the next of the individual Predacons is the Bull Tantrum, as he was originally called. This is a reissue of the G1 Tantrum with Bull's head. And this is the Tantrum from my main collection and Predaking, where he was known for some reason as Torox. So the only one of the Predacons who had a name change before their reissue. His function is listed as Fueler, and his motto is "Anger gets me running better than any other fuel." And again, his name very much defines and aligns with his personality, being a sort of perpetually angry, in various shades of anger, but that is what you would expect from a bull named Tantrum. The next of the individual Predacons is the Rhino Headstrong. This is a remake of the original G1 Headstrong, and this is the remake that I use in my main collection and Predaking. Headstrong is another of the pretty cool looking Predacons with his big rhino head and horn. His function is listed as ground assault, and his motto is "the best advice is not to listen to advice." Like many of the Transformers, his personality and his name are very much aligned. So the name Headstrong, he's very stubborn and hard to sway from a decision that he's made. He'll go ahead with it in a headstrong fashion, no matter what anyone tells him, and that, of course, ties right back to his motto. Our next Decepticon from the '86 catalog is one that appeared in Transformers the movie, although he goes now by the name of Gnaw. Gnaw was one of the Sharkticons, and they were a swarm type from the movie, so we saw lots of these guys on the Quintesson world, and a lot of them were destroyed there, although in the end they're sort of led to revolt and take over the planet. But Gnaw apparently is the name of one of those, and that's what the toy was sold under, not Sharkticon. But because they're a swarm type, you can get any number of them and have them in your collection, and they're not conflicting with each other. I have a few examples of the Gnaw Sharkticon. This is a small one that came from Transformers Cyberverse, and here's a bigger one that came out a while ago, and looks like our Sharkticon. And then this is a more recent one that's a little bit bigger and a little bit nicer. But of course, I keep all of these in my main collection because, again, they're a swarm type, and you can have any number of Sharkticons in a group. Now, his function is listed as Assault Sentry, and his motto is "everything is prey." So, the Sharkticons, like any sort of a group that gets together, sort of lose individual toughness and end up being just destroyed en masse by whoever is going up against them. But he is an interesting figure. He's kind of got a unique appearance among Transformers. There's not many of these sort of fanciful animal type creatures, and so that kind of makes our Sharkticon here a little bit notable. Our next Decepticon from '86 is Galvatron. From Transformers, the movie, Galvatron was the evolved form of Megatron. And so after Megatron was defeated and nearly destroyed in the Battle of Autobot City by Optimus Prime, Galvatron was reconstituted by Unicron into a more powerful and deadly form. I have a few Galvatron toys here. This is from the red line, so very posable but not transformable. And this is the one I use in my main collection. You see, kind of like Megatron, he was a gun, but a more spacey, science fiction-y type gun with this giant cannon, very powerful and devastating. This form was actually a headmaster with his head being named Nucleon, but the original Galvatron was not a headmaster. His function is listed as commander, and his motto is, "My power is everything, defeat is absurd." And Galvatron, like Megatron, is very powerful and very difficult to defeat. But of course, that's sort of the whole point of Transformers, the movie, of Hot Rod becoming Rodimus, defeating Galvatron, defeating Unicron, and all of that. But Galvatron, he's very tough. He definitely inherits a lot of sort of anger and viciousness from Megatron, and one of his first acts is destroying Starscream, something Megatron really should have done a long time ago, right? But we've seen Galvatron in other Transformers series, and the whole sort of pattern of Megatron becoming more powerful and taking the name of Galvatron repeats even several times in the Unicron trilogy of Transformers cartoons. This is a Galvatron from Transformers Energon, and it does look in some ways similar to the original Galvatron. So that's one of the places that we've seen Galvatron in later Transformers series. I still think he sort of lacks a little bit of something that Megatron had, right, in some ways, but he's certainly a very apt villain in his own right. Now, interestingly, there are some Transformers comics where we see sort of a future Galvatron return to the past and actually confront the earlier Megatron and get to see how all of that plays out with a little bit of time travel there. But Galvatron, he is very powerful and does kind of address some of the faults that Megatron had. So definitely a very worthy adversary for our Autobots led by Rodimus Prime. The next group of Decepticons were the Battle Chargers, and there were two of them. The first of which is this one, Runamuck. Runamuck is the white one, and this is a remake of Runamuck that's really very good. It is very much, it's a good looking figure, and it looks a lot like the G1 Runamuck. His function is listed as Shock Trooper, and his motto is, "The road is my playpen, cars are my toys." Now, the Battle Chargers did not appear in the movie, but they did appear in some of the later episodes of Transformers, and they're very kind of vicious and battle-oriented, and kind of a little bit funny in their similar but different colored appearances. But I do think that they do look kind of neat with the head, and I don't know, just something about the Runamuck. It's a very cool looking toy. The second of the Battle Chargers is this one, Runabout, and here we come to really the first major hole in my Transformers collection. Now, there's a few that I haven't come from some of the off sides, like the Omnibots and the Power Dashers, but of the ones appearing in the catalog, this is the first one where I don't own any form of remake. There was a remake of Runabout done, but it was, I think, a Target exclusive, and I never saw it. It's hard to get and very expensive to buy secondhand now. So if you're listening, Hasbro, make us another Runabout. But this is an original G1 Runabout, which I bought recently at a secondhand store. This is not one that I had a child. And the Battle Chargers had a sort of interesting and unique mechanic of the Transformers. This one doesn't work perfectly, I think, because it's a little bit sticky there, but they were a little bit similar to the Jump Starters over on the Autobot side. And what should happen is if I pull it back, it has a, it will charge up and then it will zoom forward, right? And what it should do is pop all the way up and sort of automatically mostly transform. But as you can see, it's a little old and that doesn't work perfectly. This is the only Runabout that I have in my collection and would very much like to get a remake of him. His function is also listed as Shock Trooper, same as Runabout. And his motto is, a pretty car makes an even prettier wreck. So again, these guys were all about destruction and battle. And, even the original one, even though it's simple and a simple transformation, it's still a pretty neat looking Transformer. The next Decepticon subgroup is another group of combiners, which are the Combaticons, and they form together into Bruticus, which is this combined form. Now, I have several versions of Bruticus and a few extra Combaticons to show here as well. This is the Bruticus that I use in my main collection. It's one of the first remakes to be made. It looks a little bit different from the G1 Bruticus because it's based on a Transformers video game, but I always liked it. It's kind of unique looking and still similar enough to the original G1 Bruticus. There was another version done that was more G1, and I didn't buy all of them. I only got the Onslaught here, who's the main one, and he's pretty cool looking guy. But they are remaking the Combaticons again currently in the Age of Prime's wave of toys, and so far only Vortex here is out from that line. So hopefully we'll get the rest of them next year, and I'll be able to make a bigger and more G1 looking Bruticus than the one I have here. A couple of extra things. This is a Brawl. It's actually a movie toy. Some of the Combaticons appeared in the movies. This is an Onslaught Micro Machine from the Transformers live action movies, which really doesn't look like the original Onslaught, but it's still a pretty cool, mean looking vehicle. This is very interesting. This is from the first Transformers Robots in Disguise series, and while it looks almost identical to the original G1 Bruticus, was actually sold as a Ruination, and many of the individual figures were not, even though they have the exact same vehicle forms as the original Bruticus, didn't have the same names as the original characters. So I'm not sure what that was all about, but I still think of him as a version of Bruticus. And then there's this, which I believe is sort of loosely associated with Transformers Energon, and at that point went by the name of Bruticus Maximus. And like the other combiners in that show, like Superion Maximus, it isn't actually 5 individuals, but really just the main sort of central character or robot that has a personality and intelligence, and the other ones are drones that combine with him to form Bruticus Maximus. So instead of being a kind of a gestalt personality, it's more of an individual power-up. But this figure is interesting because of its sort of automatic transformation mechanic. So if I unplug one of these guys, you'll see it actually transforms immediately via springs into its vehicle form. And if you reattach it, it turns back into a leg. And as you can see, they don't always stay on very well in the combined form. They're always sort of popping off and wanting to revert into their vehicle form. But it's still a pretty cool looking figure and another version of Bruticus. Now, Bruticus, his function is listed as warrior, and his motto is "The road to conquest is paved with Autobot Rex." The Combaticons did appear in the G1 cartoon, and there's an issue or episode where they are created by Starscream, to do his bidding, but they become part of the overall Decepticon army, and they are some of the more warlike and interesting of the Decepticon warriors. So definitely Bruticus here is a very major combiner on the Decepticon side. The first of the individual Combaticons is the tank Brawl. This is the Brawl from my main collection, and it's a pretty nice one. He is, I think, one of the obviously militaristic vehicles of the group, being a tank himself. His motto is, "I was built to be wild," and his function is ground assault, not surprising there. His biography describes him as being very aggressive and warlike, and also a skilled fighter, none of which is surprising given his function within the Combaticons and his alternate form. The next of the individual Combaticons is probably the most well-known and frequently seen, definitely the one with the most personality. That is this one known as Swindle, who is a Jeep or 4x4 military type of vehicle. His function is munitions expert, and his motto is "Make deals, not war." And he's known for being both very greedy as a Decepticon and also very business savvy. The name Swindle kind of fits him perfectly. He's always looking to make a deal, to trick someone, to try and get something he wants in any sort of shady or underhanded way. We have seen him, first as a member of the Combaticons, but also operating on his own. He appeared in both Transformers Animated and Transformers Cyberverse, very much the same type of character. He also appears in several of the comics, and just his presence and his ability to, or his focus not on conflict but being driven sort of by avarice, that makes him a unique and very interesting character. The next of the individual Combaticons is the Space Shuttle Blast Off. This is the Blast Off that I use in my main collection. One of several Transformers we've seen to this point with a space shuttle as an alternate form. His function is Space Warrior, and his motto is, "I destroy Autobots by choice, not command." He's described as being cold and aloof, which maybe fits in with the space shuttle and being out in outer space on his own. Space shuttle is kind of an interesting choice since it's not really a military vehicle, but I guess he fits in with the Combaticons just fine. This version is a little bit different in terms of coloration from the G1 form, but we are getting a new one being made, come out sometime next year, 2026. So we'll see if the newer Blast Off is more true to the original, but I still like the way that this one looks. The next of the individual Combaticons is the helicopter Vortex. This is the Vortex from my main collection that forms one of Bruticus's arms, and this is the latest Vortex to be made, part of the current Age of the Primes line, and the rest of the Combaticons are being made for next year, so we'll hopefully be able to get those and join this guy to form a Bruticus, and maybe he'll become my main Vortex. His function is listed as interrogation, and his motto is, "I'm Vortex, fly me if you dare." He's definitely the type to use fear as a weapon, try and intimidate people, whether he is fighting against them or interrogating them. So he is kind of a mean guy. And while his original face doesn't necessarily show a lot of emotion, he certainly looks very mean in this form, and that's one of the things that I like about this figure. And the last of the individual Combaticons is the Combaticon leader Onslaught. This is the Onslaught from my main collection. And of course, he forms the body of Bruticus. And you can see there's the head of Bruticus as a part of Onslaught here. His function is Combaticon leader, and his motto is, "The mind is the greatest weapon." And while he is, of course, a great warrior, he's actually more known for being a strategist and a battle planner, and that's really what makes him so dangerous, and also a good leader for the Combaticons. Our next Decepticon is a very large one. That is the dinosaur slash base Tripticon. Now, I've never understood the name Tripticon. I don't know what that means or what it's supposed to indicate. It's one of the rare instances where a Transformer name doesn't seem very well thought out or to match the character very well. But nevertheless, here we have Tripticon. This is a remake of the original Tripticon, and Tripticon was often paired up against Metroplex as the Autobots' base and city, and they had many battles over the course of the third season of the Transformers cartoon. Also, like Metroplex, he had a few smaller components or other Transformers that came with him, and also like Metroplex, only one came with the reissue or remake here, and others came out separately. So he does have on his front here this car, just like it came with the original Tripticon, and this is known as Full Tilt. But unlike the original, this one was actually made as a headmaster. So he comes with a head with the name of Necro. So that's an interesting change with this Tripticon. We also have Brunt here, which was a tank that came with Tripticon. And then we have Fast Track, another little vehicle that came with Tripticon and has since been remade in this form. So altogether, these are Tripticon and his various component parts. Tripticon's function is assault base, and his motto is total victory requires total destruction. So again, very similar to Metroplex, he actually had three forms. One is dinosaur form, also a city form, and then a battle station form that was, kind of a mobile battle platform, just like Metroplex had. Again, we did see him in season 3 of the original cartoon, and there was a pretty funny take on Tripticon from Transformers Cyberverse, where he was leading a team of Decepticon sort of offshoots or dark versions of certain Autobots, and he was just kind of funny in the sense that he was a little bit more refined and intelligent than you would expect from a big giant dinosaur. But in some of the comic books, he appears as one of the Titans and has all that going for him. We also see some sort of crossplay with the Dinobots, him being a dinosaur and them being dinosaurs also. So, aside from not really understanding his name, he's definitely a very cool looking, a very big and imposing figure. He's got all of these extra parts that make him neat and interesting. So, I didn't have a Tripticon as a child, so getting this remake was definitely very special. And I do think it's one of the more kind of when you look at your collection as a whole, he's one that really draws your eyes to him. Just the size and the dinosaur form, it really kind of is something that kind of attracts your eyes when you're looking at a large collection. The next subgroup of Decepticons are the Stunticons, another set of combiners that join together to form Menasor. The Stunticons were introduced at the same time as the Aerial Bots in the G1 cartoon, and whereas the Autobots were looking to expand their air power with the Aerial Bots, the Decepticons were looking to face off against the Autobots on the road by creating the Stunticons. Now, I have an original set of the 1986 Stunticons, including Motormaster and Breakdown, Wild Rider, as he was known then, Dragstrip, and Dead End. And then I have a few extras. Well, so this Menasor comes from the Combiner Wars line, and just like other combiners that were put out then, one of these does not match one of the originals. In this case, it's this one here, which goes by the name of Off-Road and was replacing Wild Rider. And the Wild Rider from this set, much like the Slingshot from the Aerial Bots, was very difficult to find and went by the name of Breakneck. So I never got that, but eventually in a later release, a remake of the Stunticons, I was finally able to get a Wild Rider, and so I now have that hole filled. I also got here a Wild Rider that was put out as one of the movie toys, so you can see he's a little bit more movie looking. And I also have a drag strip from another time that the Stunticons were made. And I got this one because I usually get these race car looking Transformers, just because they're kind of a cool sub collection on their own. But Menassor's function is listed as Super Warrior, so he's not just a warrior, he's a super warrior, and his motto is "Leave no Autobot uncrushed." In addition to the 5 main robots in this one, there's another one that attaches here to the chest, and this one was given the name Blackjack, which is actually a name used by one of the later Micromasters. So you see the Micromaster Blackjack showing up in this iteration of Menasor, but he's a pretty neat looking combiner with this giant sword that he has, always sort of squaring off against Superion and the aerial bots. We don't see a whole lot of the Stunticons after G1. There is available an animated Motormaster toy, although he never showed up in the animated cartoon that I ever saw, so I'm not sure why that exists. But some of you also see him go by the name of Motor Breath sometimes. But the Stunticons were definitely a neat addition to the Decepticons. Going along with that, adding more vehicles and cars to their ranks, and that whole sort of rivalry with Superion, made them, one of the neat combiners from the 80s toy lines. The first of the individual Stunticons is Dead End. This is an original G1 Dead End. It's a pretty cool looking car with racing stripe and neat red color. And then this is the remake of Dead End from my Menasor. Again, pretty neat looking, nice big car. His motto is "We are all just food for Rust," and his function is warrior. And again, the motto kind of sums up his personality and goes along with his name, Dead End. He's described as just being a pessimist and, sort of waiting for everything to fall apart or die. So that's, I guess, what you get when your name is Dead End. The second of the individual Stunticons is Breakdown. This is an original Breakdown in his vehicle form. You can see it was actually a Lamborghini. And here's the remake of Breakdown from my main Menasor. His function is listed as Scout, and his motto is "Keep your optical sensors to yourself." His personality is kind of defined by paranoia and a lack of self-confidence. So not the most mentally stable group, the Stunticons. The name Breakdown has been used in other Transformers series, notably this version of Breakdown from Transformers Prime. But as you can see, it's a very different looking bot and very different personality. So I think just sharing a name but not the same character. The third of the individual Stunticons was originally named Wild Rider. This is an original G1 Wild Rider. You can see it's a pretty cool sort of gray and red colored car. Later remakes were going to make him more of a black and red, kind of like this one here. Now, Wild Rider is also sometimes goes by the name of Breakneck, and in the original set of Stunticons that I use for Menasor in my main collection, Wild Rider was released as Breakneck, but he was kind of a rare, not easy to get figure, and instead he was replaced in the ones you could readily obtain by a new character called Off-Road. So for a good while, the Breakneck Wild Rider was a hole in my collection until they reissued the Stunticons again, and I was able to get the new version of Wild Rider that came out at that time. So I don't think he's compatible with my other Stunticons, but it's still good to get a Wild Rider figure and not have that missing from the collection. Now, his function is listed as terrorist, and his motto is either you're out of my way or you're out of luck. And again, his personality kind of fits perfectly with his name. He's described as being kind of wild and crazy, taking risks, not a lot of self-preservation instincts, which can make him an effective warrior, but also a liability at the same time. So that is what you get with Decepticon Wild Rider. The next of the individual Stunticons is Drag Strip. This is an original G1 drag strip. As you can see, he was a race car. And here's the drag strip that I use in my main collection. His function is listed as warrior, and his motto is the first one to cross the finish line lives. Now, he's described as being hyper competitive and a bit of a braggart as well. I think of him as kind of an anti-Mirage, since they're both G1 and similar looking race cars. And in fact, some molds of Mirage have been used or used slightly modified to create drag strips as well. So he was, I think, probably my favorite of the Stunticons, just because he was a little bit unique compared to the other ones. But there is your Stunticon drag strip. And the final of the individual Stunticons is Stunticon leader Motor Master. This is a original G1 Motor Master in vehicle form. This really cool purple and gray coloration in the black cab. That was really neat. It also had this sort of neat looking blocky head. This is what he looks like in his remake form. Again, pretty cool looking, pretty mean looking guy. Because he matches, at least in form, though not size, Optimus Prime, you get to see him as the anti-Optimus Prime from G1. In fact, they go head to head at one point in the cartoon, and Motormaster does not win. But his function is Stunticon leader, and his motto is these wheels are made for crushing, and he's described as being vile and kind of a bully, and that is kind of the aspect he takes on as the commander of the Stunticon. But we have seen at least some different versions of Motor Master. There's one available now, done in the style of the Transformers animated cartoon, although I don't remember him actually appearing in that cartoon, but they went ahead and made that figure anyway. But there is your Stunticon leader, Motor Master. In 1986, Soundwave would get an additional cassette in the form of Rat Bat. This is the only Rat Bat toy that I have. It's from the data disc era of Soundwave cassettes, and so it can be very easily transformed and then will sort of spring action itself back into a robot form. So there is the data disk, and then it can just pop itself back into the Rat Bat form. Rat Bat's function is listed as Fuel Scout, And his motto is, "The road is my dinner plate." So make of that what you will. There have been several other Rat-Bat toys made. In the comic books, he was often known as Senator Rat-Bat, and had some political role within the Transformers or Autobot political hierarchy. And there is a Senator Rat-Bat toy, although it doesn't have an alt mode that is either a rat or a bat. So I don't know what's up with that. There's also one that's come out recently that comes for no apparent reason with a Perceptor, which is a more G1 accurate cassette transforming and looking version of a Rat-Bat. So that would be a cool thing to get if I ever needed to buy another Perceptor. But yeah, that's another addition to Soundwave's collection of cassettes, Rat-Bat. So the Autobots would get 3 triple changers in 1986, and the Decepticons would get a 3rd triple changer to add to Blitzwing and Astrotrain, and his name was Octane. I have a couple of Octane figures here. This was the first Octane that was made, and then this is a nicer, larger Octane that came out later. This one, interestingly, first went by the name of Octone, as well as it was a headmaster, and his head's name was Murk. So that's M-U-R-K, if you're wondering about the spelling. Octane's function, listed as fueler, and his motto is, "He who has fuel has powers." And so he is a fuel transport vehicle, and that was kind of his role among the Decepticons, was controlling the fuel and distributing that, and that's kind of what he leveraged and used to sort of prop up his own importance. But like all triple changers, he had a vehicle form and an air-based form. In this case, he was a jet plane in his air form, and he was a tanker truck in his vehicle form, and that's where he gets his function of being a fueler and a fuel distributor. So there is your 3rd Decepticon triple changer, Octane. Our next Decepticon is another one from Transformers the movie, and that is Scourge. Now, Scourge was an interesting one in the movie. He was one of the Transformers, one of the Decepticons, reformatted by Unicron. And while it was made very clear that Megatron was reformatted into Galvatron, it was never 100% clear who the other Decepticons were that got reformatted. It appeared to be some of the Jets as well as some of the Insecticons, but it wasn't quite definitive. And Scourge came with a fleet called the Sweeps that were identical in appearance to Scourge. And so while in the 80s there was ever a Sweep toy made specifically, you could buy n number of Scourges and build your own fleet of the Sweeps. And so in that sense, the Sweeps at least were a swarm type of which you could have any number. And so where this gets interesting is, this was actually an early Scourge remake that was done, but in my main collection, I consider this to be a Sweep, and this was actually sold as a Sweep, but since it's nicer than my Scourge, I call this one Scourge, right, and the other one a Sweep. And yes, he is another Transformer that has facial hair, so we get a couple of those in the movie. His function, and this is, again, how Unicron described him in the movie is as Tracker, and his motto is "Desolation follows in my trail." So we kind of see him largely as kind of a, right hand man to Cyclonus. He's kind of Cyclonus's backup or henchman. At least that's kind of the way it seemed looking at things in the movie. But Scourge himself didn't necessarily show a lot of personality. But as the leader of the sweeps, that was kind of what he was known for. And the final Decepticon from the '86 catalog was Cyclonus. Like Scourge, Cyclonus is another one who was reformatted by Unicron, and again, it's not quite clear who he was reformatted from. But a couple of Cyclonus toys here from one of the times that he was remade. They're actually the same toy, just slightly differently colored. The reason that I have two. One came with his Target Master partner, and we'll talk about Target Masters when we get into one of the later years. And the other one came with a pretty cool hot rod that I wanted to get, so I ended up with two of those. His function is listed as Saboteur, and his motto is "Compassion is the Autobot's downfall." He was the one that we would see Galvatron flying around in Transformers, the movie. So he was definitely kind of the number two there, and a very powerful warrior. And we see a particular episode in season 3 where Cyclonus and Ultra Magnus are kind of forced to put their differences aside and work together for a time. And we see that he is kind of an honorable warrior in some ways. Cyclonus plays a major part in one of the Transformers comic books. And again, we see him as this sort of powerful warrior, almost an honorable type of warrior. And I think that's become part of Cyclonus's character. Is while he is a powerful warrior and has definitely destroyed a lot of Autobots, and you can kind of hate him for that. He's not the most evil Decepticon. He has some amount of honor that he fights with. So Cyclonus, he's definitely a bad guy, but he has at least that positive quality. And here we have all of the new Decepticons that were present in the 1986 catalog. What it lacks in number, it makes up for in size with the Giants, Trypticon, and Predaking, and the other combiners. Those who were featured in the movie were primarily Galvatron and Scourge, Cyclonus, as well as the Sharkticon and Ratbat put in an appearance as well. Overall, I think it's a pretty cool line and addition to the Decepticons, even though some of these would be used more post the movie. Now, that doesn't bring us quite to the end of everything that we're going to look at in 1986. As with other years, there were a few supplemental entries that do not appear in the catalog, and there are a few other loose ends that we're going to need to tie up before we can move on to 1987. 87, another great year for Transformers. We'll see the introduction of the Headmasters and the Target Masters, and a few other cool things as well. But as I said, a little bit more to look at before we move on completely from 1986. The next Transformer from 1986 that we need to talk about is a real anomaly, and that is this guy here, Reflector. The things that are anomalous about Reflector, it's a long list. But He did come out in 1986. He was not part of the paper catalog. He was available as a mail away, so that's why he doesn't appear with the other members of the 86 catalog. But the first thing that, well, besides that, that is odd about Reflector is that Reflector is actually not a single character. The name Reflector refers to a group of three individual robots that combined to form their camera form of Reflector. So unlike other combiners, which had their own robot form and vehicle form, and then could form a giant robot, these guys didn't have an alternate form separately. The three of them combined to form the camera form of Reflector. So that was kind of strange. And while everyone remembers Reflector, no one typically remembers the individual names of the components that made up Reflector, which were Spectro, Spyglass, and Viewfinder. Here's what else is anomalous about him. Reflector appeared in the Transformers cartoon, the G1 cartoon, from the very beginning, even though he didn't come out or wasn't available until 1986. That was strange. You would also see multiple of him on the cartoon in robot form, and then in one or two episodes you saw them combine into the camera form and spying, but all of the robots looked like this one, which is what the G1 viewfinder looked like. He formed the main part of the camera. The other two, Spectro and Spyglass, you didn't see them in the cartoon, or you kind of did. They just looked exactly like this one. Now, in this form, he's known as Refractor, right? So this is not a Spyro or a Spectro or a Spyglass. It is a Refractor who individually turns into a camera, but can also be combined with two other of these, or his clone Scrap Face here, to form an even bigger camera, right? So you can make the three in one thing happen, even though this individually is a refractor reflector. It is totally totally makes things difficult from a cataloging perspective, but I've gone with the approach that the Gestalt name is reflector, and this individually represents a single reflector, and we just don't have his component parts. But to talk about them individually, Spectro, function reconnaissance, and his motto is watch everything and everyone, but also watch your back the closest. Then we have Spyglass, function reconnaissance, motto, if it can be observed, it can be conquered. And then lastly, Viewfinder, function reconnaissance, and his motto is see and you can know and you can destroy. So they're very much into spying and observation, right? Which of course makes sense since they are a camera. The original G1 camera is actually pretty cool looking. It's modeled on a real camera, and it's got the flash bulb and everything. So that is pretty neat. I believe that the original Reflector has been reissued, but not mainstream, so it is very expensive. And this is, I believe there is also another remake, but I believe it's an Amazon exclusive and also kind of expensive, so I haven't gotten that. But it's nice finally to get this Refractor anyway and add him to the collection. And why we have Scrapface and what his deal is, I have no idea either. But that is another of the Transformers from 1986. Now, a casual Transformers fan might think that RC from the Transformers the movie of 1985 was the first and perhaps only female Transformers character, but actually neither of those things is true. There were actually several female Transformers characters that appeared in a single episode of the Transformers cartoon, and they were among characters much like RC who did appear in the cartoon but never received a toy, at least during the 1980s. All of them have since been made into toys, and I have those here on display. There are 6 of the female Autobots who appeared in the episode The Search for Alpha Trion. So even in the episode about the female Autobots, it wasn't even titled with one of the female Autobots. It was still titled with Alpha Trion. But in that episode, we saw 6 female Autobots who were living on Cybertron and were kind of a resistance to Shockwave's rule. And this is why they didn't appear with the Transformers who were on Earth, although why we never saw them ever again in any other episode isn't quite explained. But during the episode, 4 of them were referenced by name, and 2 were just there and kind of in the background. Those 2 were given kind of names by fans, and those were eventually adopted as their official names. So now all 6 have names. And those are Elita 1, who was the leader of the female Autobots, and got more to talk about her. There was also Moonracer. It was this really cool color, and I think probably my favorite of the female Autobots. Also, in that episode, we saw Firestar, who in this toy at least goes by the name of Nova Star. So that name was changed at one point. And then Chromia, who other than Elita 1, may be the only one to have appeared in any other Transformers cartoon. The 2 who were not named in the episode were Lancer here. This is kind of neat purple and orange coloring that she has. And Greenlight here is the other one. Now, during this episode, Elita 1 was kind of put in peril, and first Optimus Prime and then several of the other Autobots traveled to Cybertron to try and help out and rescue the ladies. And it wasn't explicitly stated, but it was kind of implied that there was friendships or relationships between some of these characters. So, for example, we saw some interaction between Powerglide and Moonracer, as well as between Ironhide and Chromia, right? And then there was also perhaps a relationship between Firestar and Inferno, and in fact they talked about having been on rescue missions together in the past, so they at least were old friends, as it seems the other ones were as well. Alpha Trion also is a Transformer character who appeared in the cartoon in 2 episodes, but did not have a figure made until much later. And when they first made a new Alpha Trion, it didn't actually look much like his cartoon appearance. This one is actually fairly recent, and it's really a redeco of a Scourge, but at least the face and the coloration is very much as he appeared in the cartoon. So that's a pretty good Alpha Trion, although there have been some others since then. But the focus of the episode was kind of around a relationship between Optimus Prime and Elita 1. And this would be further established in a later episode called War Dawn, which we'll talk more about in a future video. But it was definitely one of the times where we've seen sort of the most emotion shown by Optimus Prime as he's concerned about Elita 1. First, when the Decepticons have taken her prisoner, and later when she uses a special ability that she has to freeze time, and it requires sort of a transfusion of energon from Optimus Prime to revive her. And so that's kind of establishes their relationship. And it's sort of further referenced in the War Dawn episode, where a lot of Transformers lore comes from. But as it was revealed in the episode, as the other Autobots were entering the Ark and eventually would be traveling to Earth, there's a big explosion, and Optimus Prime believed Elita 1 to be destroyed, which is why, after he was revived 4 million years later, he didn't, go looking for her, because he assumed that she and apparently, all of the other female Autobots were destroyed in that same explosion. Now, at the end of the episode, the female Autobots decide to remain on Cybertron to continue battling against Shockwave, while Optimus Prime and the other space bridge back to Earth, and then they're never seen again. But, it kind of makes you think that, maybe they should have worked together or figured out a way that they could all go back to Earth, or, all come back to Cybertron. But I guess, they were just supposed to be there for this one episode and then not seen again. Now, why this was done and why, they never received toys, those are, interesting questions around, what was going on and what the motivation for introducing these characters was. But it's definitely a sort of neat part of the Transformers history, as well as an interesting point of several characters being present in the cartoon who didn't receive any action figures during the 80s or any of the G1 toy lines. So in the original G1 Transformers cartoon continuity, you had the first 2 seasons, and then effectively in the showtime a 20-year gap, and then you had the movie and then season 3. And the 1986 catalog was mostly characters that showed up in the movie, and then some would show up later in seasons 3 and beyond. So prior to that, you had 1984 and 1985 sets of characters to appear in the show. And what I've always found strange is that while not every figure necessarily showed up on the show, there were certain characters on the show who never had a figure made of them. And that's a little strange. So today we're going to look at characters from the first 2 seasons of the Transformers, so prior to the movie, who were present on the cartoon but didn't have a figure made of them. The first one we can talk about is this guy, Devcon. He showed up in one episode. It was kind of the focus of the episode. It was kind of like a wandering Autobot who was on his own, going throughout the universe and having his own adventures. Why they created him for that episode, and instead of using one of the other characters who had a figure but never appeared on the show, I don't know. It's only been, but he didn't have a figure made during the 1980s. Only in recent years that they've made figures of him, and this is actually just the first one. They've made him a second time, and that figure is available in stores now if you want to get the obscure character of Devcon. Another one is this one, Nightbird, who again appeared in one episode and was the focus of that episode. Now, technically, Nightbird was not a Transformer at all, but a robot who was constructed by a human who had been inspired by the Transformers. And of course, the Decepticons got their hooks into her and, if anything, turned her to their side. It's not necessarily a sentient being, never spoke on the cartoon, and that was all that we saw of her. But again, years later, it was seen fit to create a figure of her. The name Nightbird has been used for some other Transformers characters later, but that was her nature in the G1 cartoon. Now, really obscure and appearing for only a moment is this guy, and this is where things get confusing. So there was a scene in one of the early episodes where we see a crane-like vehicle, and Bumblebee refers to him as Hauler. He was yellow, right? So it seems like that was maybe an early version of Grapple before the Grapple toy came out or got its final name. Grapple would appear in later seasons, but he wasn't present at that time. But now this guy has his sort of his own identity from that one little blip, and this figure is known as Road Hauler, and as you can see, it is green, and it was just a recolor of a Grapple figure anyway. So what I think was just a sort of mistake in dialogue, or a bit of dialogue from before Grapple got his final name, has turned into his own character now, Road Hauler. One of the biggest characters on the show who didn't get a figure back then was Alpha Trion. Alpha Trion appeared in 2 of the episodes, The Search for Alpha Trion and a younger version of him in the War Dawn episode. He has since become a very, let's say, major Transformers character in terms of being one of the original 13 Primes, and we saw him in Transformers 1 and various other places. So, but he did not get a figure back in the 80s, and when his first figure came out, I didn't like it very much. He had like an animal alternate mode. This is actually a recolored Scourge, but it's very accurate to the original G1, and that's why I like it. There is, again, currently one out with the Age of Primes, but it's the younger version of Alpha Trion, and I'm probably not going to get that one. Now, 3 characters came in together, and again, this was during the War Dawn episode, and for a while you could get a 3-pack of these characters. These were Orion packs, the pre-Optimus Prime form of, well, Orion Pax and Optimus Prime, his girlfriend, Ariel, who appeared in that episode, and his friend, Dion, who also worked at the docks with Optimus Prime, or then Orion Pax. Dion was killed in the episode by the Decepticons, and Orion Pax and Ariel both very much damaged, and that's where Alpha Trion came in to rebuild Orion Pax into Optimus Prime. And then, although it didn't happen in this episode, but was alluded to rebuild Ariel into then Elita 1. More on her in a second. Dion, it is believed, just perished and was not rebuilt by Alpha Trion for whatever reason. Now, I've already done an episode talking about Elita 1 and the various other female Autobots who also did not receive any action figures during the 1980s, but have all been since built and made. But it's noteworthy, again, that Elita 1 and Ariel now both have their own individual figures. So, again, they're various stages of evolution, much like Optimus Prime and Orion Pax. So there you have various characters who did appear in the Transformers cartoon in the first two seasons, and for whatever reason, didn't get a figure back in the 80s, but at last, finally, we have a road hauler figure, which everyone has been wanting since those several seconds that he appeared in that one episode. Now, just as there were Transformers characters that appeared in the cartoon in seasons 1 and 2 that never had toys during the 80s, but have since been given figures, there were a number of characters from the Transformers the movie from 1986 that appeared in the movie, some of them even very prominently, but didn't have toys at that time. And we had to kind of wait many years to get those characters in toy form. Why they were presented in the movie but didn't receive toys, well, in some cases it's apparent, in others it's less so. But let's start with one of the most obvious ones, and that's RC. Obviously, she was a major part of the movie in many scenes, and just a sort of focus of the movie throughout. But no toy was made of RC in the 80s, and we'd have to wait a number of years until we got one. Just like Elita 1 and the other female Autobots who appeared in that one episode of the Transformers cartoon, Hasbro was just very averse to making female Transformers toys, likely because they didn't think that they would sell at all. And so maybe they were right, maybe they were wrong, but for whatever reason, we've had to wait a while to get these. And at least, now we have those. The other very obvious omission from the toy line is the main villain of the movie, Unicron. Now, why a Unicron toy wasn't made at that time probably just has to do with the size and the scale, although of course there were large Transformers even within the 86 line, like Metroplex and Triptychon, so certainly it's not impossible or unheard of at that time, but we would have to wait until Transformers Armada before getting a decent Unicron figure, this being the first of the Unicron trilogy, and that's what line this guy comes from. Comes with, of course, a Minicon, being from Armada. This guy goes by the name of Dead End and is kind of a moon, all right, that can circle around Unicron. This figure actually transforms into kind of half a planet, so you'd almost have to buy two of these to get a full Unicron planet, but I'm not that crazy. That's another of the major characters from the movie who didn't get a toy until much later. The rest are more minor, but still notable. Here's one. This is the Alleycon. So if you remember, on the Quintesson world, there were guards that were both Sharkticons and Alleycons. And while the Sharkticon got a toy in the 86 line, the Alleycon did not. These guys also appeared in season 3, but no toys for them at that time either. This toy, in fact, I didn't know it existed until I found it at a toy show one day and was amazed to see it. But it's really cool since it was a part of the movie and nice to add that to the collection. Similarly, we have the Quintesson themselves. Now, the Quintessons were not a transformer, which even the Alleycon was, but they were a villain and played a part in Transformers the movie, and we would see more of them in the third season of the Transformers cartoon. With this, it's maybe not surprising that we didn't see a figure of them during that time period. They don't transform, and they're a little bit odd looking, so it would have been a little bit off script, I think, for the Transformers to have a toy of them, but it's nice that they've been made in a few forms since then, and you can put them in your Transformers toy display. Now, the next two are a little bit similar in some ways. You recall when Unicron reformatted a number of the Decepticons, he created Scourge, but he also created a whole fleet of sweeps that Scourge could command. And while in the 80s you could, of course, buy a Scourge toy, there was nothing that was sold separately as a sweep toy. But then you could just buy multiple Scourges, they all look the same, and use your extras as sweeps. So it's kind of not entirely an omission, but this figure here from many years later was actually sold and named as a sweep, but it's so good I actually use it as my main Scourge. But yeah, again, there were no individual sweeps toys sold during the 80s. Similarly, we have the Junkions, right? So on the Junk Planet, we saw numbers of different Junkions, many of them looking very similar to this guy and similar to the one Junkion toy that was made, Wreck-Gar. And so again, you could just buy multiple Wreck-Gars and pretend that your extras are just other Junkions. But if you look closely in the movie, you can see there's at least one other type of Junkion that doesn't match the motorcycle type that is similar to Wreck-Gar and all of the other Junkions that looked just like him. And that Junkion didn't get a toy, though it did appear in the movie. Now, there have been a number of Junkion toys made, a lot of them recently, so I'm going to do a separate video on those. But again, it's worth mentioning that there were Junkions seen in the movie that did not get a toy at that time. And then the very last thing to mention are the humans. Now, there were never human toys to go along with the Transformers. It was a line of transforming cars that turned into robots. There weren't human companions with them. And part of that, I think, comes from their origins as not part of any particular cartoon series when they were originally made in Japan. So why would there be humans with them? That was an addition of the American cartoon. But again, Spike and Daniel were seen prominently throughout the movie, and so it's cool that years later we finally have a Spike toy that is pretty nicely detailed and looking like him in the movie. This was also sold as a Spike toy, but given the scale difference between them, you can easily use this as a Daniel in your collection and fill in that hole as well. So here we have a number of Transformers and others that were very prominent in the movie, but didn't get a toy until years later. So as I mentioned in a previous video, we've seen a number of different Junkion toys in recent years, and given that they sort of all come, or their origin is in the 1986 Transformers, the movie, where we did see there were several different types of Junkions, at least in the background, we can, kind of associate these guys with that timeline. A couple of them are in the same motorcycle type form as your standard Wreck-Gar Junkion, like this one, Crash Bar, and this other one, Junk Heap, who also sometimes goes by the name Junk Yard. All of them have very unfortunate names, I would say. Other ones we have here are Trash Master, yes, and Scrap Hook. These two have kind of interesting vehicle modes, kind of a post-apocalyptic Mad Max type of feel to them. So that's kind of neat. And then there's this one, goes by the name of Detritus. he is, unlike these others, a little bit ambiguous in his loyalties. You'll notice both an Autobot and a Decepticon symbol on him, so he's kind of playing both sides. You may also notice that he's kind of a recolor of a Hound figure, but that's just the way Detritus looked. A lot of them have this kind of burnt orange color scheme. It, again, goes back to the original Wreck-Gar and Junkion figures from the movie and the 80s. There'll be another one coming out next year called Jalopy, who also kind of has this post-apocalyptic feel to him. So that's kind of what we're seeing in these lines of Junkion toys that we're getting these days.